India is building a great wall of China when it comes to foreign direct investment. That's the big decision taken by the Narendra Modi government over the weekend. To discuss this now, all the way from London is legal eagle Harish Salve, senior advocate, also a Queen's Counsel. Mr. Salve, thank you so much for taking the time out to join us here on ET Now. This is Nayantara Rai. I hope you and are safe and following social distancing. You are in London, which is of course another hotbed when it comes to coronavirus. If I could talk about this burning issue, which is now turning out to be a flashpoint between India and China. China has already responded, saying India looking to ban foreign direct investments or restrict it or to bring investments to a screeching halt by the new circular is discriminatory and illegal. If I could first begin by getting a reaction to what India has announced and then get into the specifics.
I'm always amused when China uses constitutional epithets such as discriminatory in a country which talks in terms of grinding to powder the bones of those who protest in Hong Kong, and a country where doctors who are whistleblowers disappear without a trace. When they start using the language of the rule of law and the constitution, it's always interesting. But let's answer it on merits. Discrimination is where you treat similar people dissimilarly. China is in a class unto itself. And what the world has seen between December 2019 and we're getting to the third week of April 2020. I don't think you need too much persuasion to come to the conclusion that China's role in unleashing this virus, in suppressing information, and the latest I read 2 days back was now trying to contain and restrict flow of information about treatment of this virus. China's role is dubious. The US president has flagged it. Indian Prime Minister raised this issue about the WHO right on the very first day, and the way China kept back material information which could have saved the world so much grief. So all this has put China in a special position. Also, you mentioned a moment ago, London is in a severe lockdown and continues to be in a lockdown. And I think we are looking at least 3 more weeks of lockdown, if not more. All work has come to a near standstill in United Kingdom. The economy is in a distressed state, as is the economy of the United States. The unemployment figures are skyrocketing. The whole of Europe is reeling under the impact of this merciless virus. And at a time like this, I have a very simple point. Normally, people would keep their finances under strict control to see which way things move ahead. The very fact that China is looking at making investments at this time feeds into the allegation that China would try and use the economic havoc caused by this virus to try and buy distressed assets. And it is the duty of all countries to protect their companies, their businesses from this kind of Chinese intrusion. So China is in a class by itself, and it has to be treated separately. And finally, the Chinese role in this entire spread of virus is still under a cloud, and it needs a lot of explanation. I don't think Beijing and Shanghai have suffered anywhere near what Paris has suffered, what London is suffering, see what's happened in Spain, see what's happened in Italy. I don't think Beijing and Shanghai have suffered as much. And I don't know, there are some unanswered questions about how this virus has spread more to Europe than it has spread within China. Information from China is on a very selective basis, and you cannot trust somebody who hides information of an illness which is devastating the world.
Mr. Salve, very valid points you're raising over here. And, of course, a lot of these we've been hearing for a while now, but legally and strictly legally, the kind of actions that we are going to see. China has been very quick to say what India is doing is illegal, is discriminatory. It goes against the G20 consensus. It goes against the rules of the WTO. Donald Trump has now raised a point saying how to even distinguish between the WHO and the WTO. We are in uncharted territory. You've seen how the United States, for instance, has decided to stop funding the WHO. What happens to law at the moment, international laws as they exist? Is all of this going to go where? Is it going to go to the ICJ? Is there no need for it? Or is it going to be a case where it's going to be foreign diplomacy that's going to...
Holding back information about the contagious nature of this disease, which has devastated the world, puts China in a rather odd situation when it starts spouting rule of law. The WTO did not envisage the occurrence of such events. I believe the trade deal which China has with the United States as a carve-out, a force majeure carve-out for pandemics. Well, if China wants to be let off the hook for pandemics, then other countries can equally protect their own position in pandemics. So I don't think there is a violation of the WTO. The WTO agreement is a trade agreement in normal times, not in war times. And if the situation is such, a completely unprecedented situation, a completely unanticipated situation, the response of countries, the problems which we have seen in managing hospitals, managing hospital beds, have shown that nobody was prepared for this. So in a situation like this, if for a short time you put foreign investment on hold, and we have not prohibited Chinese investment, we have only said it will go through the government route. So theoretically, there is no ban on investment, just that the automatic route has been taken away. So I think China can hold its horses for a while before it goes into predator mode and starts picking up distressed assets all over the world.
That's absolutely right. If you look at the Indian stock markets, it's down over 25%. Tens of billions of dollars have been shaved off when it comes to market capitalization. We've seen how China, for instance, tried to raise and has raised its stake in India's largest mortgage lender, HDFC. But Mr. Salve, what I also want to get your views on, and a lot of people may not know this, not only are you a fine lawyer, you've also been a chartered accountant. I want to get a little technical with you on this point, not to do with chartered accountancy as such, but for the first time, it seems as if India is also making a distinction of sorts when it comes to FDI and FPI, foreign portfolio investments. So far, we do not know as yet what the market regulator SEBI is going to do. It's been nearly 48 hours since the Modi government at the center has come out with this circular on FDI. What is your sense on this? If you've seen how China is trying to pick up and increase stakes in companies, and will that also have to be looked into? We don't know as yet also, for example, if China has been trying to register FPIs in other domiciles, be it Singapore, even Hong Kong.
Nayantara, as you know, the Securities Exchange Board has much greater operational flexibility, and they can respond virtually on a day-to-day basis. I'm sure they are watching the market a few times a day, not even a few times a week. And if they find any sort of attempt by China to use the FPI mechanism to try and acquire assets rather than merely to make investments in good Indian securities, I'm sure they will act with alacrity and step in and prevent the FPI being moved. The FPI is not meant to buy assets. The FPI is meant to make strategic investments in markets. If the FPI becomes a route to FDI, then I'm sure the SEBI will act and prevent it. If somebody wants to put in money in your markets to help your markets keep afloat, that stands on a qualitatively different footing. So the government of India is right in watching, in preventing foreign direct investments, which means you get control over assets or significant interest in assets, but watching the FPI route to see where it goes.
Mrs. Salve, I also want to get a little clarity on one other issue. You know, we all know how a lot of money comes into India as FDI as well as FPI, routed via Singapore, Hong Kong, Mauritius, etc. I've spoken to a whole host of lawyers on this issue since morning, and I think you're the best one to answer this. What happens to investments coming in from Hong Kong? We don't have exact clarity in black and white. The circular that the Modi government has come out with talks about borders with India. Hong Kong doesn't share a border with India. It is supposed to have another domicile. In the past, when it comes to immovable property and rules, we have seen how the RBI has clubbed Hong Kong with China when it, and said the same SARS and all of that. How do you legally see this? Do you think the circular also covers Hong Kong and investments that are coming in through funds in Hong Kong?
In fact, it's wider. It says indirect beneficial interest. So if it can be established that there's an indirect beneficial interest going to China, then I'm sure you will be able to prevent those investments. And one good way of judging indirect beneficial interest is applying the consolidation rules, which applies to balance sheets. If ultimately the balance sheet of the Hong Kong company is or should, by applying international standards, be consolidated with a Chinese company, mainland Chinese company, or belonging to Chinese promoters, then it will fall within the negative band.
But Mr. Salve, the reason also I'm asking this is that if you're going to have this circular be extended to, let's say, FPIs, then how can you take prior government approval? It would be one argument to invest in a stock market. Is that possible at all? Or if the idea is very clear, if the beneficial ownership goes to China, they should not be investing in the stock markets.
Exactly. And if FPI is not meant for FDI. FPI is meant for investment in markets and in market instruments. You may buy equities, but if you buy equities on a trading basis, on a portfolio basis, that's completely different. But if you're going to misuse FPI for purposes of acquiring Indian assets, significant control in Indian assets, then I'm sure the SEBI will act quickly and prevent it.
And, in the past, we have seen a lot of hesitancy when it comes to custodians of banks actually reach out actively seeking beneficial ownership. But I guess desperate times call for desperate measures, and legally, morally, you think it is fine for custodians to do that, and maybe India would not be sending a negative signal?
Absolutely. See, this is a time where countries will have to protect their own vulnerable assets. If you have one country which has managed to keep itself in a position of unfair economic strength, and I mean unfair in the sense that when the rest of the world is reeling, instead of reaching out to help the rest of the world, you want to act as a predator and go shopping all over the world, it is unfair. If from that definition of, or from that perspective of unfair, if countries make provision to protect themselves and ring-fence themselves till their economies are back on their feet, I don't think there's anything wrong, and there's no discrimination. It's perfectly legitimate. In fact, it will add greater legitimacy to instruments like WTO, which will answer the critics of instruments like WTO who say this is a ticket to destruction. WTO agreements are not tickets to destruction. They are good instruments of economic growth, and they must have the elbow room to protect countries when such needs arise, as the need has arisen in the present situation.
Mr. Salve, when we look at India and what has happened in the recent past, some of the largest corporations, new corporations, the startups, the tech companies that we have, have massive exposure to Chinese companies like Alibaba and Tencent. Look no further than Paytm, Ola Cabs, Oyo Rooms, Swiggy, Zomato. We know that they all have massive shareholders when it comes from China. What do you think is going to be the impact on such companies, such tech companies that, in recent times, India has been glorifying, has been extremely proud of? They're, of course, under the new economy. Or do you think that whatever happens is only going to be for the short term, or it is for them now to rethink who they're bringing on as shareholders, that they could, going forward, be a lot of trouble?
Nayantara, what the world is going to look like 4 weeks from now, 6 weeks from now, is anybody's guess. Let's be very clear, in the larger scheme of things, India is not in as significant a position as maybe a country as the United States. And we will see how the world decides to deal with China. Believe me, there are concerns all over the world. And yes, there have been Chinese investments in a lot of Indian startups. Governments, when they liberalize and allow free investment to encourage economic growth, do not ever mortgage their right to intervene if the need be to protect their own industry in a situation as unprecedented as what we find ourselves in today. So if somebody says under the company law or under the existing Indian law, I can now behave in a particular way which is inconsistent with not just Indian national interest, but global economic interest, then the government of India has the power, executive and legislative, to protect Indian startups till such time as things come back to normal.
I know you have the good ear of this government, Mr. Salve, so if I could be cheeky and ask you this question, that, when you try to rein in small elephants for the big dragon, what would be your advice? How should it be done so that, the larger Indian economy is also protected?
Well, let's keep perpetuating this myth that I have this government I have the ear of the government. This government has an ear, some very fine advisors who have been advising it very correctly. And you can see the result of that in this wonderful measure which they have brought, very timely measure against China. I think right now we are living from day to day. I think the primary focus of the government of India right now will have to be to reignite the economy. And there are some very positives, including I saw an interview by Mr. Raghuram Rajan, who normally doesn't speak in such terms. I saw an interview by him. I've seen the interview by HDFC Managing Director, Mr. Puri. And I feel that there are areas where India could try and step in and reignite its economy. And the government may have to pump in a lot of liquidity, including, if necessary, by deficit financing, because otherwise the ducks are in a row, oil prices are low, capital costs are low, and inflation is therefore not a real concern as of now. So there are a lot of things which the government can, and I'm sure will do, to protect the small and medium enterprises which have suffered on account of the lockdown, to help them build back, and even to help the big industries, and most of all the working class who has suffered. Endeavor of the government has to be to make sure that there is no unemployment caused by this lockdown. And to prevent unemployment, you have to, in the short term, help the unemployed worker, but in the long term, you have to help the employer to make sure that the job continues. And I'm sure all this is something with which the government of India is fully engaged. And I have no doubt you will see from day to day how measures are announced. All over the world, governments are engaged with this. And I'm sure the government of India, which has been fairly successful in its fight against this obnoxious virus, will do well.
In fact, Mr. Salve, is that also a reason why when Prime Minister Narendra Modi addressed the nation, of course, we are unprecedented times, he's not the only head of state to declare war, but do you think that another reason for that could also be to gain legal advantage, to be able to take tough decisions which may not always be strictly as per law, allow you to go outside the four boxes of the law, contracts, and take those tough decisions? Legally speaking, could that be one of the reasons as well?
I don't, Nayantara, I don't think there was anything illegal in any of the decisions. Having said that, law is one thing, compliance with the law is another thing. A law may say that you should not go out of your house. If you defy the law, there's only that much. And if that law is defied in large number, there's only that much the government can do by way of coercive enforcement. The Prime Minister reaching out personally and appealing to each and every Indian, putting the cards on the table, telling everybody how badly we are likely to be affected if these measures are not put in place. And most important, Prime Minister Modi has communicated, and he's a great communicator. He has communicated to the people that while the government is fully alive to what is going to be the downsides and the difficulties of this lockdown, it's a calculated decision which has been taken at the highest level. This is not a bureaucratic, let's find an easy solution decision. It's a decision taken at the highest level. It's being monitored minute to minute, not even hour to hour, at the highest level. That adds credibility to the measures. And because of which you have seen the kind of voluntary compliance in India, which is almost unprecedented. You know, as we always say, Indians, one of the favorite Indian pastime is breaking rules. We have behaved very maturely when it came to the lockdown rules.
Yes. No, I was also asking because the right to move freely throughout India also exists. I was just trying to understand if that was one of the reasons as well why we saw the kind of language that we did, the phrasing. But Mr. Salve, we're running out of time. I introduced you as a senior counsel of the Supreme Court. And also...
Sorry.
I wanted to lean on your expertise for international law. You're the Queen's Counsel. We're talking soon after these media reports of how Germany wants to claim $130 billion from China. We are perhaps going to see coordinated action by the G20, at least the G7. Japan has already started moving manufacturing out of China. It's offering incentives to do that. Look what India is doing when it comes to FDI. So, Mr. Salve, I want to end the interview by asking you, as far as international law goes, after coronavirus, do you see a lot of it being rewritten? We're in uncharted territory. Of course, China will try to flex its muscles, is going to claim that a lot of action, especially coordinated, is illegal. What is it really going to take if the large countries do decide to take action against China and try to sue China, try to make claims against China, ban investments from China, have higher taxes on those companies that do business in China, all of those things?
There are two separate things. One is suing China and making a direct claim against China. That will depend on what finally the investigations reveal was the Chinese role. And believe me, if it is found that they willfully suppressed information, you may have a cause of action against China, even in public international law. Public international law is not cast in stone. It has evolved over a period of time. But it depends on the nature of evidence. Where countries are pulling businesses out of China and preventing China from entering in, it is not a question of suing China, but China suing them. All I would say to China is best of luck. China has always brick-walled international agreements. They will now realize the downsides of not having strong investment treaties and international agreements.
So So right now, when you look at the ICJ, would that have the jurisdiction to decide this, or that only time will tell how any of this is going to pan out? If you see the kind of action that's being propagated against the WTO, for example, I don't even know what the future of the multilateral agencies is going to be going forward.
WTO has its own dispute resolution provisions. WTO has its own dispute resolution provisions, and if China was to try and take the world down on the WTO, it will realize the kind of allegations which the world will put on the table and the kind of material which they will put against China will not make China look very nice. So I think they will, while you may have a lot of fire and brimstone about how angry they are with the rest of the world, when it comes to action, let's see how much they actually step out of their comfort zone and take the world on.
With that, Mr. Salve, we are out of time. I'd like to thank you for joining us all the way on Skype from London. It was a pleasure having you. You're the best to go to when it comes to these situations. Look forward to many more interviews. Keep practicing social distancing.